I'm Anand Ganu. Welcome you all. Thank you very much for joining this very important topic. And I will start with short introduction about Garje Marathi, and followed by I would like to say a few words about Dr. Ashwini Mokashi as well. Garje Marathi, we started about 5 years back. Garje Marathi is mainly to promote education and entrepreneurship and networking within Marathi community. And we are fairly successful in doing that. We have presence around the world. We have chapters in nearly 23 countries. And we do conduct these webinars or think tank meetings on a regular basis. In the same line, today, I'm very thankful to Dr. Ashwini that she has offered her expertise and her wise words she has offered to share with us in this very demanding time. Today's topic is Pursuit of Happiness in the Lockdown and Beyond, a perspective from Upanishad, Gita, and Stoicism. Dr. Ashwini, I'll give you a short introduction about Dr. Ashwini. She has done PhD in philosophy, and in one word we can describe Dr. Ashwini as मराठीमध्ये जसं आपण म्हणतो की विदुषी म्हणून त्यांचं आपल्याला इंट्रोडक्शन करून देता येईल. शी इज ऑथर and was president at Princeton Research Forum, and she has command over 8 languages. Of course, Marathi, Sanskrit is understood, but she has command over ancient Greek language, Persian, and even Urdu. So we all are eager to listen to Dr. Ashwini Mokashi. Over to Dr. Ashwini Mokashi. A small request: you can put your questions during her presentation in the chat. Do not unmute yourself. Dr. Ashwini, please take over.
Well, thank you everybody, and thank you very much to Mr. and Mrs. Ganu for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure and delight to talk to all of you about my research and also about the topic of happiness, which is very close to my heart. So good. I would like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Ganu and the team at Garje Marathi. The organizers who decided that this was a good topic to be talking about. So my topic today is Pursuit of Happiness in Lockdown and Beyond, and I'll take various sort of like bits and pieces from different philosophies. And I also want to thank Mr. Ganu for very kind words. I just want to say that I can only speak 4 languages very well. The others are sort of like read and not really sort of used in speech, but the languages always help sort of study philosophy further, because then you can also refer to the original works and figure out what the author really wanted to say. So given the interest that we have received today for this talk, I think this is one of those occasions where I don't need to defend why philosophy is important. We obviously understand and value philosophy and the wisdom from philosophy. And somehow when you talk about the wisdom, it seems as if like the person who is talking about it is also wise, but that's not true about me. I'm just a messenger of all these philosophies and trying to interpret them to the best of my capacity. So I'm going to focus on 4 topics today, and this is going to be a bit of like a 33,000-foot view, because it's very difficult to capture sort of like the tenets and the principles in detail in such short time. But the summary of my talk is going to be how to use leisure to improve our lives, how to measure happiness according to the Gita's psychology, how to pursue happiness, and just a small gist of what we could do as a part of our self-care. So as you know, that COVID-19 is playing a lot of tricks with the minds of people. It's bringing, along with the virus, a lot of anxiety, negativity, and just a lot of anger or frustration in the global population. These are not pleasant times. And there's a lot of uncertainty involved for everybody and stress for all of us, either because people are losing jobs or they are losing, people that they know. And these are all very sort of, distressing times as a result. But one thing that this period has done to most of us is that it's opened up time. I mean, it's put a lot of constraints on us, but as a result of those constraints, since we can't commute, we can't socialize, we can't do a lot of other things that we would normally use our time for, we have that time. And that time is actually a very big gift to us. And a lot of the philosophers would actually pray for this kind of leisure in order to, help them improve their lives, to get time to think, to reflect, to contemplate. And we see that sort of, across the board in different philosophies. So in Indian philosophy, for example, we have this concept of vanaprasthashram. So there were 4 ashramas, which were sort of like, 4 quarters of human life. And the first one was devoted to education. The second one was devoted to married life, being a householder. The third one was devoted to sort of like, creating space for yourself, being detached from the duties of a householder, and before you go into sort of, full-scale spiritual life. So when the leisure is not forced upon us like it is today, we would normally be, free, retirement when, things are sort of, a lot of our household duties and the duties for earning our livelihood are sort of being taken care of. And we are sort of, worrying about what to do with our time. So in some ways, it's a very unique opportunity that we can use this time to improve our lives. So what does the Hindu philosophy say about that? So for Hindu philosophy or Indian philosophy, we can say that this is a chance for reflection, contemplation, and some serious analysis of how life is going. We always talk about karma philosophy, and like, we talk about, oh, this is my good karma, this is my bad karma, whatever. So we always have some sense of like, what we're doing right in our lives and what we need to improve upon. So this is a good period for, sort of re-examining our lives and try and see like, what is the deficit here? Do we need to improve upon our good karmas? I mean, in the sense, like, are there a lot of karmas that we are not very proud of, and shall we sort of improve upon them, or is there some line of work that we are undertaken, which is a good line of work, and then we continue on that? It's also a time when we can sort of like figure out the meaning of life, and all these dilemmas or whatever things have been bothering us. We can work on them and try and figure out, what is it that we are really meant to do? What is our potential? What is it that we need to do in life? And continue on that. So this time, sort of gives you an opportunity. And this is also the time when like we are sort of letting go of our duties, and we are trying to be useful to society. And we are also creating sort of, a moral life for ourselves. I mean, that doesn't mean that we are not moral in life, but it does mean that we get to examine our sort of, moral quotient in life. So if you go to Greek philosophy, Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. So this is again a chance to examine your life and like, examine what is it that needs to be done better or different. If you go to the Stoics, and Stoics are some of the philosophers, the group of philosophers that I like to study. They are Hellenic philosophers, if any of you are not familiar with the Stoics. And they flourished between roughly about 300 BC to 200 AD. And they had a major influence, on the writings of Western literature, on Christianity, and their thoughts were sort of like, carried over. But the Stoics by themselves were not started for some period until, let's say, in the last century, and in the last 20 to 50 years, they have literally like, sort of gotten a lot of rise, and a lot of people are now aware of what Stoicism is. So Epictetus was one of the Stoics, and he's totally opposed to pleasure, and he always discusses leisure versus pleasure. So what he would say is that, whatever time we spend on pleasure is really time wasted, but time that we spend on leisure is a time that allows you to be creative, to think, to contemplate, and again, to, further your goals of life. So you come out of leisure thinking and feeling better about life, whereas you come out of pleasure feeling completely sort of, desolate. For example, if you like chocolate chip cookies or whatever else you might like, if you spend your time eating a plate of chocolate chip cookies, it's going to give you those moments of pleasure, which is so badly needed after hard days of work. But at the end of it, you can only eat so many of them. And when you're done with them, you're going to be concerned about sugar level. You're going to be concerned about what life is going to look like in the next few moments when you don't have chocolate chip cookies. But in leisure, for example, it gives you time to sort of, focus on how to improve certain action plan, how to, sort of take a new line of thought, or how to proceed in some direction which you may not have thought about before. Like, for example, this, concept of corporate retreat in the corporate world, where they always sort of like re-examine and analyze their vision and mission for life. So this time is really sort of like, to brainstorm with ourselves as to how you want to spend your life going forward. And since we are very lucky to be alive so far, it's a good time to sort of like, use that time for that purpose. Seneca, who is another Stoic philosopher, says that the life given to human beings is so short that it's like a point of time. And so, since life is so short, it's really our moral duty and responsibility to see how we can, utilize the life for moral purposes to the best of our capacity. And he again says that the life of pleasure is not very meaningful, but he also says that, life spent in public duties is not very meaningful. It's very engrossing. Life spent on social occasions is also not very good. And so he says that the only meaningful way to spend life is by being in the company of philosophers. Now, I'm not trying to advertise my services to the society, but what he means by that is like, sort of, it's very important to think and reflect and, improve our lives and that of the lives of other people around us. So what do we learn from this concept of pleasure? We basically learn to reflect, introspect, contemplate, assess our own past actions, and revise our strategies for the future. So the leisure would have served its purpose, and it would turn out to be the most wonderful gift that the nature would have given to us if, we sort of use it in a way that sort of like, improves our life. So that is my first point. My second point is about like, how to measure happiness. And here I'm going to talk about the psychology of the Bhagavad Gita, which is really derived from the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. And the shlokas or the verses that I refer to are all in the second adhyaya or second chapter of the Gita. And of course, Gita is a very, very short and concise text. So you can interpret it in so many different ways, in so many different sort of, angles. So you might find like, the same words being interpreted for philosophical purposes and for psychological purposes. But you see the list of, sort of different topics that are discussed in the Gita. Now, the ultimate message of the Gita is obviously, the spiritual message. But the way that the Gita takes us to the spiritual message is through a long line of, different aspects of life that can be fulfilled and enriched. So the verses that I'm referring to are 2.48, which talks about equanimity or samatvam, where it talks about samatvam yoga uchyate. 2.38, where it talks about being equidistant from pleasure and pain, which is samadukha sukhe krutva labha labha jaya jaya. And 2.57, which talks about non-attachment or anasakti, where it says nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna pratishtita. So what we get from here is what I've come up with as a 5-point scale of happiness. And you can just make a note of it to yourself. Like, supposing if somebody asks you, are you happy? You can give an answer with 1, being seriously unhappy, 2, being somewhat unhappy, 3, being balanced, not neutral, but balanced, 4, being somewhat happy, and 5, being super happy. And how we define those is like partly up to us, but partly also understood in the Gita in a very specific way. So if you are on number 1 or number 5, then you're not balanced at all. The idea is to be at number 3 and be balanced at all times, but it's easier said than done. It's very, very difficult, and very few people can do it. So the idea is to sort of try and get there as often or as much as possible. Because if you say to yourself, gosh, it's not possible for me to be balanced all the time, so I'm not even going to try, that doesn't help. If you try, it does help. And happiness, as it's understood by Indian philosophy, by the Stoics and the Greeks for that matter, is really a matter of learned happiness. It's not something that's given to anybody on a plateau. It's like there are people who are just happy people and there are unhappy people, but it's really something that we have to strive for. And then we'll go more in detail about how to strive for it. But for example, if you have this 5-point scale, and if somebody asks you whether you're happy, normally we have some definition of what it means to be happy. We have been happy, we have had happy moments in life, and we know what it feels like when we are happy. So when we say, oh, I'm not so happy today, we are actually imagining that I want to feel at, let's say, number 4 or number 5, and only then I can consider myself being happy. But what is really important is that if you continue to do your work on a daily basis without any distractions, without any problems, and you continue to be productive and functional, then that is what the Gita would say as the concept of a happy person, which is what I would say is a psychology of the Gita. And then we'll also look at it, from a philosophical point of view. So I think in the current times of staying home and working from home, if we can muster the courage of keeping our daily life going and, learn to be equanimous to the bad news and learn to be grateful for being safe and being alive, I think it's still, it could be considered as sort of as an idea of being happy. Now I go to the third point, which is the pursuit of happiness, which is also the topic of the book that I published last year. And there we talk about, the comparative ideas of happiness, both in the Bhagavad Gita and the Stoics. And you can see that the Gita's idea of happiness, or even Gita's philosophy, is really sort of, derived from the Upanishadic philosophy. And Upanishads are sort of our first ancient philosophical texts where, they're profoundly philosophical, a lot of deep discussions and a lot of spirituality. When it comes to the Gita, it's really sort of, given in a form that you can act upon. So as I said, Gita is very small and concise, and it doesn't talk a lot about deep philosophy, but it gives you sort of, a lot of things in a very actionable form. So if you go to the second chapter, the third chapter, for example, you would practically get all the answers, that you need. If you make progress from there and you want to sort of, produce to the life of spirituality, then you can keep going and try and see how it sort of helps us in being a spiritual person as well. But to stick to the second chapter and the third chapter, the Gita talks about the concept of sthita prajna, or a wise person. And the wise person is sort of supposed to focus on understanding what the right thing is and doing exercising the judgment to do the right thing. And this gist is fulfilled I mean, the gist or the spirit of this argument is fulfilled in five concepts. And those concepts are such that one is swadharma. Swadharma is doing your own duty. So you need to understand your duty, do the duty, and excel at it. So it's not just like, sort of, if you're supposed to do the chores, like you get them out of your way, but you do them like, to the best of your capacity. Then the second is Shraddha, which is believing in the principles of the Gita. I would say some people, if they find it difficult to be a believer, it's okay. It's optional in the current times if you're not a believer, but it's still very important from practical purposes to, follow the other four. And of course, if you're a believer, you have, a further sort of path to pursue. The third is samatvam, which is equanimity to both pleasure and pain, which is not to get too excited about things that are going good and not to get too depressed about things that are not going good. So accept life as it is and understand that, some things are going to go good, some things are going to go bad, and that's okay because, that's how life is. The fourth point is anasakti or non-attachment to gains and losses. So very similar kind of feeling that, you have to be non-attached. Now the Greeks use the word detachment, and that creates sometimes problems in understanding because detachment seems like the denial of attachment. But the Gita uses the word non-attachment, which is, in my book, it's very kind of similar, but the way the Gita describes it is much more sort of profound in the sense like they accept attachment, but they say you have to, sort of stay away from the attachment. In the sense like they're not denying attachment. They're not saying that you need to be attached to your family, to your friends, to your pets, or to your property, your likes and dislikes, your likes, not so much dislikes, but you have to stay away from them because if you are very attached, then sometimes you become a part of them, and then you can't really figure out when things go go wrong with whatever object or person you're attached to, then you can't help yourself. So it is for your own further own advancement, so to say. And the fifth point is shanti, which is tranquility. So when you follow all these points, what you get is a peace of mind. You go to sleep better. You're not anxious, and that's because you have the wisdom of knowing what the right thing is, and you have the courage to follow through, and that helps you sort of like become a tranquil person, a peaceful person, and that really is the same as being happy. So in this state, for example, the state is known as state of wisdom or Brahman establishment or Brahmistiti. And it's very difficult to attain, but once it's attained, then it's sort of possible to keep practicing it. And again, as I said, this is a learned happiness. This is not something that's like that comes to us naturally, but it's something that we have to sort of keep working for. And an example I could give is that, like, how a painter becomes a good painter after he or she has painted many, many canvases. So it's like the wise person, that one becomes a wise person after they have practiced wisdom and practiced virtuous actions, for multiple times. So you can imagine that it may not be possible when you're young and, sort of passionate and enthusiastic about a lot of things. But it's still something that's necessary to be done before you pass from the scene. So the Stoics also look at it as a period of, developing virtues. And the Stoics don't have a concept of afterlife, but they still think that it's very important to be virtuous before one dies, because what's the point at the price of the life? You're born in one way, and if you haven't learned anything in this life, then it's not worth living. So it's really important that you become a virtuous person at the end of the life. And for the Stoics also, the idea of happiness is something that you have to strive for, and they see the epitome of happiness in the wise person, and they call the wise person sapiens. So the sapiens is somebody who follows all the ethical principles, and the ethical principles can be briefly described as the following. One is kathikanta, which is appropriate action. The second one is oikaiosis, meaning what belongs to oneself, and that is like, your personal space belongs to you. We are not necessarily talking about property and material gains, but there are also some examples of what belongs to you. And when you understand what belongs to you, you understand what belongs to other people, and this leads to the idea of justice. Then ariti, which is the skill, skillful action, or also sometimes also translated as virtue. So whatever you do, whatever your duties are, they need to be done in a very skillful way. And then they have like, the concept of virtues, which is like courage, wisdom, temperance, and justice. So you have to follow through those virtues as well. Then the goal of life, as to describe it, is to live in accordance with nature. So they accept the supremacy of nature. And right now we are actually, all of us are experiencing the supremacy of nature, where like in the virus is ruling supreme, and we are trying to sort of like, sort of fall into the pattern where we don't challenge it, don't test it, but like, try and see how we can contain it. It's very interesting, how Stoicism just seems very applicable right now, because for the longest time they had the reputation of being very strict, being very disciplined, and not very sort of, applicable to modern life. But I think, they are very applicable, and we're beginning to see how. And these ethical principles are all followed by a wise person, and that makes the person wise and tranquil and peaceful. And the happiness is a result of all this wisdom and virtuous action, and is described as eudaimonia, which means good spirit. So for Seneca, happiness essentially means tranquility and peace of mind, which results from a constant practice of virtue and intellectual exercise, which is required to perform moral actions. So in both the systems, we see that a wise person is the one who has the capacity for making correct judgments when undertaking actions. And for these judgments, they have complete responsibility. They take the responsibility, and they also explain it to people, which is another part of being wise, is that you should be able to, defend your actions, explain to others, because sometimes the wise actions are not necessarily conventional actions. They are very different from, how other people would have solved the same problem. But whatever a wise person does is good for the mankind, and so the humanity is better off as a result of those. So this is really my gist of like, the philosophies that I was talking about, except for the last one, where I also want to talk about briefly Upanishad's concept of happiness. So Upanishads, as I said, is our first ancient writing on philosophy and spirituality. And their idea of happiness is really what they call as bliss, like is the concept of bliss. And they also talk about like, how a wise person becomes happy and blissful as a result of lifelong meditation, as a result of knowing Brahman, and as a result of becoming Brahman. So Brahman is supreme, and Brahman is like, what you would, what they call as ultimate reality, or roughly it could be translated as God by some people, but there's no word, there's no word God used in the Upanishads, because in the Hindu mythology, gods are really people like, Indra, Varuna, Shiva, and they're all part of the mythology. Whereas in the philosophy, we talk about Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, and Brahman exists everywhere. We all have a spark of the Brahman. We are all a part of it, and when the wise person understands that, after years and years of meditation, experiences that, the wise person becomes a part of the Brahman. And they give a very beautiful example, and there are tons and tons of discussions about this in the Upanishads, but I just want to pick one small example, which is given in the Mundaka Upanishad, where it describes that there are two birds on a branch of a tree, and one word is called Jiva, and the other one is Shiva. There are multiple names given to these birds actually, but roughly the bird, which is jiva, which is like a soul or individual soul, is constantly in search of food, in search of happiness, is very anxious, very insecure. Whereas the other bird does not need anything. The other bird, which is Shiva or Ishvara, is not looking for any kind of food, has no desires. He's just an observer. He's just looking around, looking at the world, and is very happy. So the first bird always wonders, what is the matter with the second bird? Why doesn't it need any food? And then, it also notices that the second bird also doesn't have any anxieties or insecurities and is very happy. So at some point, it dawns upon the first bird that the first bird is also in substance similar to the second bird. And when it dawns upon the first bird, then the bird starts feeling more secure, more happy. And he realizes that, he's very much a part of this great, powerful Brahman that rules the world. And when he understands that connection, then he himself feels very powerful, he becomes very happy. And, that's sort of considered an analogy for understanding Atman and Brahman with the example of two birds. So the first bird cheers up and tries to be more like the second bird in order to be happy. So what it says here is that the Upanishads really consider, happiness as a part of spiritual happiness, as a bliss for what it's worth, for the modern life. I think it's still important to try and seek this kind of spiritual understanding in our practical lives. It may not always be possible for all of us who are sort of logical and rational minded people to understand that cannot be observed, that cannot be sort of experimented upon. But what I've seen is that this line of reasoning, when we start from the practical nature of sort of trying to understand things and the wisdom from all these philosophies, it does open up a lot of different options for us and options to become happy. And whether we are in lockdown or not makes absolutely, very little difference for this concept. So I want to just summarize the gist of my talk and say, so what are the strategies that we can use both for self-care and for self-care with the capital S? So to say, how to take care of ourselves through, take care of our bodies, our minds, and our spirit, so to say. So the strategies for physical care are given mostly in the Yoga Sutras, like doing yoga, eating healthy, eating moderately, taking walks in the nature or wherever you can. And Russo actually has a beautiful book on nature walks, so that would be useful too. How to take care of one's emotions, especially negative emotions in this period. So the Stoics would say acceptance of the situation is absolutely important. And after that, do whatever is within your control and don't worry about the things that are not within your control. So as long as you can do what you can do, it's still going to, sort of make you feel very positive. Dealing with anger and grief, both the Bhagavad Gita and Stoics talk a lot about that. And basically, they're very strict and disciplined people. So they just say, crush the grief. If you continue to sort of be in grief for a longer period of time than necessary, it's just going to affect, badly other various things in your life. So it's better that you control these negative emotions and passions as soon as possible. There's a lot of discussion about anxiety in the Upanishads, and one of the examples that I gave you earlier about the two birds also shows that once we realize that we are the agents of Brahman, then we look at life very differently. And I'm not suggesting any fatalism here or, sort of loss of freedom of choice or anything of the kind, but it changes your perspective. And then you start thinking like, okay, there's a meaning. There's meaning for my life. There's meaning for this universe. And I'm a part of it and things are going to be okay. And just this positivity creates a lot of, again, like, options for you to feel more cheerful and like, get things done on a day-to-day basis. This is another topic which can go on forever, but I just want to briefly mention that one also needs to take self-care in terms of money matters. And one can define it in two ways. If it's absolute poverty, where like, there's no food on the table, it's still important to stay calm and, figure out your solutions so that you can continue and, make sure there's food for the family. If there's relative poverty where you didn't get what you're trying to get, and either the conditions or the situation has made it impossible for you to reach your goals, it's best to manage expectations, which is what the Stoics would tell you. And managing expectations itself, sort of creates a positive wavelength. Ethical principles are very important to follow because they result in unhappiness. If we don't follow the ethical principles and if we are immoral, trust me, we don't go to sleep very often sometimes because we are, it's bothering us at the back of our mind that, oh, maybe I could have done this differently, or maybe that needed a different solution. And to avoid that, we have to make sure that we understand what the right thing is and do the right thing as far as possible, as much as possible. And that ultimately leads to the idea of bliss. And none of this is simple. None of this is easy. We are all, we are all going to fail at some point or the other. But then, you see that there is the epitome of all these principles in a wise person. And sometimes just looking at some of the wise people who we are known either through history or around us, it still, gives us a chance to improve our lives. So in conclusion, I just want to say that human lives are no different today than they were thousands of years ago. Earlier, there were plagues. Now we have a virus. And we do have modern technology and modern medicine at our disposal, and that makes us live much longer. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have emotional support or mental health. But when we focus on these philosophies and the wisdom that they give us, it helps us stay mentally strong, stay emotionally balanced, and I think it increases the enjoyment in our lives. It cuts down on healthcare expenses too, and it enhances our connections with our family members, with our neighbors, our friends, and society at large. So thank you.